Okay, so hopefully that's good. And now I'll get started. So welcome to the Design Justice Network session, our July 10th edition. Depending on your time zone, it might be July 11th. So just as an FYI, we're an international network. And my name's Victoria. Here is a little bit about me. I live in Toronto, Ontario, which is in Canada. I am currently the International Network Coordinator for the Design Justice Network. And I live and work on the territories of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabeg, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, Mississauga, and the Huron-Wendat. We try to acknowledge the land that we're on while doing this important work that we're all doing. And I use she and her pronouns. The slides I've shared in the chat, the link to the slides, just in case you want them as a reference for later on. But they're there and you can refer back to them at any point in time. There we go. So as a starting point, the first point we wanted to share is why are we holding sessions like this? And part of that is because the Design Justice Network has been growing very rapidly over the last few years. And we're just learning more about our members, about people who've signed on to the Design Justice principles. And we're also trying to develop more resources while we're learning from our members and people who are finding the network. We've also learned a lot from our monthly Nodes Connect meetings, which have now been changed to Facilitators Connect for facilitators of the various local nodes and working groups. And we'd like to do these presentations to provide an overview of, starting points for the network and create a space for asking questions, giving any feedback, important ideas that people would like to share. So it's so great that all of you are here today. And so as a starting point, the way I start the presentations is just a little bit of background on what is design justice and why we have a network, especially for folks that are just brand new and learning about the network and the principles. So that's the main website that you can see on the screen there, designjustice.org. And there's an image of a book by Sasha Costanza-Chock, who's one of the Design Justice Network steering committee members. And there's a link to that book in the resources. It's online that you can view for free. And so just as a very beginning starting point, design justice is a framework for analysis of how design of images, of interfaces, the built environment, objects, socio-technical systems, like the way that the world runs, influences the distribution of benefits and burdens between various groups of people. And now I'm going to use an example of that. But before that example, and a really important point, and one thing that we've learned from a lot of people within the network is just design justice didn't just happen overnight in 2 seconds. There are a lot of philosophies, organizations, and people who have helped inspire this network and the design justice principles. Some of those are listed here on the screen, and there are links to their organizations' websites and things. But the Allied Media Conference is a huge source of resource for the Design Justice Network, and AMP, I had to put it in short form to fit, but Allied Media Projects, they are our fiscal sponsor, and they're also a huge inspiration for the network. The Digital Justice Coalition is another organization based in Detroit that held things like discotheques, which design justice was really inspired from. Black feminist thought, that's really hugely important, and ideas from people like Kimberly Crenshaw, Patricia Hill Collins, who developed the Matrix of Domination. I'll go in a little bit further later. And then a couple of those other organizations that you can see listed there on the screen, they're really, really important, and people who inspired the principles and the network to come about. So I encourage you to read more. There is a link in the slides to the very first chapter of the Design Justice Network, the book that I shared. And if you even take a look at the introduction, you'll get a good background on some of these movements and that history. And I can't go in depth on all of those things. So that's why there's a lot of resources here. And so now I will go into that, a little bit of history of design justice and why design justice over regular design. So the image that you can see on the screen here, in the center, there's a black circle. It says design process, and there are 3 pink dots on the inside with 8 green dots on the outside. And this represents a typical design process. And by typical, I mean, it's a process by which the people who are most centered in that design process are the people with the most power and are already part of that process. And the people on the peripheries, which are those green dots, are the people who are left out of that design process. So when we're talking about design justice, we are asking really fundamental questions around who was involved in that design process, who was harmed in that process, and who benefited from that process. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about the distributive justice model of both harm and benefits. And around the procedure, the how they were brought in or not brought into a process. And this Venn diagram that you can see is a really important tool that was part of the beginnings of the Design Justice Network. And so, as I was saying, in a conventional design process, the benefits tend to flow more to those who have more power in the process, and less benefits flow to those who have less power. So, as just a general example, like if we take a company like Samsung, the people who have the most power are the CEO or the people who are making those big decisions and benefit the most from it. People who are benefiting less are the people who are on the ground doing the work that isn't not often seen or acknowledged. So people who are building the parts that go into the phones or the contraptions, or mining the batteries that go into our phones, for example. Whereas just in that same example, the harms in that process go to those who have less power. So those folks that are working in the mines, or who are putting together the phones and the contraptions, and less of those harms are going to those who have more power, like the CEO. And so the reason we bring up design injustice, or what a regular design process is to then show, for example, why design justice is an important process and why we want more people to be using it. And so what design justice does is expands that procedural process and brings in the folks and centers the folks who are normally left out of that design process. So that experience and that lived experience of the community is centered within any process that's taking place. And those pink dots are still there because they're still involved in that process, but they're not at the center or not the main beneficiaries of that process anymore. And so the Design Justice Network has become a community of practice with people focusing on that process that I just spoke to, which focuses on the equitable distribution of benefits and burdens of the process of design, and specifically allows for meaningful participation in those design processes, in those decisions, and a focus on, or more recognition of, community-led, indigenous, and diasporic design traditions, knowledge, and practices. And as a quick note, if you do have questions or are thinking of questions, feel free to type them into the chat, and I'll definitely take a look at them just at the end once I'm done the presentation part. And so now I'll do a little bit about the Design Justice Network, what it is now and where it began. So as I mentioned, it began at the Allied Media Conference, which happens in Detroit every summer, and now is biannually happening in Detroit. So hopefully next year it'll be an in-person in Detroit plus virtual space. But the image that you see in front of you is actually from 2015, the Allied Media Conference. And there was a group of about 30 designers, artists, community organizers, technologists that came together in this room that you see there. And the workshop was called Generating Shared Principles for Design Justice. And I do have an article that I can share at the end, which kind of documents what that day looks like. But the goal of that workshop that day was to move beyond those frames of design for social good or social impact design, which I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of before. And the idea was to challenge the way that designers think about their intentions when they're designing, and think about it through the frame of that those intentions are not always necessarily enough to ensure that a design process or practice become tools for liberation. And the idea behind that workshop was to develop a set of principles that could help practitioners, whether it's someone who's a graphic and web designer, someone who's an architect, someone who is a sociologist or psychologist, or people working in any sort of process, to avoid that often unwilling or unwitting reproduction of the existing inequalities that exist. And so at the end of that session, and I'll share just a quick slide here, this is where folks were brainstorming and actually using that Venn diagram at the beginning, where it showed who was involved in the process, who benefited and who harmed. And at the end of that workshop came out with this idea of like design justice is, and as you can see on the screen, design justice is designing with instead of designing for, or becoming part of the community. And we do this by engaging our full selves, becoming or engaging ourselves in part of the community. And that article that I can share a bit later will go a little bit more in depth on that. And so that was 2015, like I mentioned. And then a year goes by and it's 2016. And the image that you can see on screen here is the 2016 Allied Media Conference, where the group of folks that you see there on the screen spent a day kind of pulling and prodding and editing those principles that came out of the 2015 workshop, to kind of bring them into more closely to what the design justice principles look like today. So on the screen, you can see two different individuals that are kind of doing that editing process, co-editing. And that co-editing process actually went on from 2015 up until, I believe this is 2018, the image that you see now. And there's a group of people there that are for the first time seeing those 10 principles, as you've probably seen them already on the website. If not, I'll show them again at the end. But in the background, what you can see on screen is Design Justice issue, zine issue number 3, which was the first printed piece that had all of the 10 principles within it, that were co-edited by the folks that you see on screen, plus hundreds of other people that were involved over those years. And so that's a little bit of that background of how the principles came to be. And a lot of those people were part of some of those groups that I mentioned at the beginning, where the philosophies and things came from. And the 3 images you see on screen are the 3 printed design justice zines that were developed each year at that Allied Media Conference. And you can see those on the Design Justice website and download them, read them freely. You can also order them if you wish. And so now I will go into a little bit of what the current structure is and how to get involved. And I'm just doing a time check because I don't have a clock in front of me, just to make sure I'm not going too long. And so in terms of the network right now, as I mentioned, it's an international network. So there's people who are part of it from all over the world who are signing on, reading the principles, really identifying and resonating with them. And so as the network kept growing, we realized we need to create a bit of a structure to hold all of these amazing people and these ideas. And so this is the image that you see on the screen now is just a diagram of what the structure of the network looks like right now. So there's a dotted line, and on the outside of that dotted line circle, you see the word signatories. And those are folks that have read the design justice principles and signed on and said, I want to use them in my work, in my daily life, as principles that I think are important and want to use. And so there's almost 2,000 people that have signed on, and everybody who signs on and consents to it gets listed on our website under the signatories page. It's also a manual process, so we only get to update it once a month. So if you haven't been listed there yet, it's only because of that. And then on the inside of that dotted line are members, and members are folks who've taken the next step to become members of the network. So they pay a small donation, either monthly or yearly, or a one-time donation. And they've committed to that I want to use these principles in my work, and I want to maybe be involved in one of the other 3 circles on the screen, whether it be the steering committee, working groups, or local nodes. And there's someone here from one of our working groups today. Maybe there's others who I don't know or haven't met, but we'll go into talking about some of those now. But working groups, generally speaking, are kind of an issue-specific topic that people choose to use the principles on and work together to collaborate around. Local nodes are very local in the way that we can talk about local right now, because most of that is online. But local as in like a city-based or a continent-based or an area of the world kind of based. And I'm going to jump into that in just a second. So a lot of people ask, like, how do I join this network? How do I become involved? And I was just explaining that structure a little bit. And the structure is the main important part is that you read the principles and identify with them and sign on. The link is there in the slides if you haven't done that and wish to do it later. And then you can become a member if you wish. It's not mandatory, but if you want to become a member, some of those benefits for becoming a member are being able to communicate with other members in the network and access our Slack channel, network with all of those movement builders who are doing amazing things all over the world. We have member story sharing sessions where we featured different members, and I'll showcase that in just a minute as well. And the ability to lead your own, as well as an invitation to our care circle, which is a new member benefit. And a care circle, our care circles are a virtual seasonal series of care practitioners leading or for design justice practitioners. So for our members. And I think it was April. In April, we had a breathwork session with a wonderful person called Caroline. And there'll probably be an upcoming session in the next month or so for those who are members. So stay tuned. But you can read some more about what the care circle is about and involved. And especially if you're already a member, please feel free to reach out and try to join that. Whew, I'm getting out of breath. So now I want to do a little bit about aligned organizations, a little bit more about what some of those working groups and nodes are doing and up to. And then we'll have lots of time for questions, answers. How do I get involved? Just at the end, we'll leave about half an hour so that any questions can be answered. Oops. One second. So a lot of people have come into Design Justice Network through other organizations or through people doing very similar or important work in the world, community organizing, movement building. And the list that you can see on screen is just naming a very few number of those, because there are many people doing amazing things all over the world. So Black Women Flourish, Design as Protest, the American Institute of Architects, Femtech, Digital Justice Lab, just a few of the organizations. And there are people who are members of Design Justice Network, as well as some of those organizations and many, many others. So we're connected because a lot of people find us through each other, which is really, really cool. And sometimes it's an organic finding of design justice. In terms of the finances of the network, this has been a question that's come up before, so we want to make sure to address that as well. But there's 4 main sources, and we've put this resource on our website recently as well. One is through membership fees. So folks who are members are contributing, as I said, like a monthly or yearly or one time. So that is part of the contributions that come in. We have merchandise and publications that people can buy over our website with Allied Media Projects, our fiscal sponsor. So they host that and do that financial administrative work for us. We also do a lot of workshops and talks. Predominantly, it's people who are part of the steering committee or local node leaders, working group leaders who are doing a lot of those workshops and talks, and oftentimes are offered an honorarium amount for that work that they do. And then there's lots of people who just give kind of one-time donations because they came across the principles or came across some work that we're doing and said, oh, this is great, and they give a donation. So just to be very open and transparent, that's where the funding comes from, and that's what helps the network run. Another really important question that people ask sometimes is like, who are the members of Design Justice Network? And so this is kind of a big question for us, because part of this is that we are still learning who our members are. As I've mentioned, that this network has really, really grown in the last little while. And we've learned more about our members from just events like this. So all of you here who are in the meeting today, just learning and being able to talk and answer questions, we learn more each time. But in terms of the importance of membership right now, becoming a member helps ensure that people are in community with each other and that we're aligned with those design justice principles, and also creates that space of care and safety. So with all of us in the online digital world these days, having Zoom bombers come in isn't ideal. So having member-focused events and things that we can do together just helps ensure that safety. But for the time that membership has been in existence in the network, it's really helped grow the capacity of the network. The goal isn't to really accumulate tons of members and tons of money. It's to encourage the facilitation and directly support the work that folks are doing. And I'm really excited that Lindsay's here to speak a little bit about one of the working groups. But yeah, the important point is that we're still learning and we're trying to build the capacity to help our members know each other and build support within the community. And it is a lot right now internet facilitated, but it's also super hyper local because of our local nodes that are meeting and talking with each other. Some have even been meeting in person recently, which is really kind of cool to see. And I think at the bottom of the slide, I included a link to our membership report, which could kind of give you a more overview of some of the work that's gone on the last year with our members. And I will try to go through the rest a little bit quickly, but I'm going to give space for Lindsay to say something about the working group. But these are one of our member benefits is being able to share stories about what members are doing with the principles and within their work. So I use the person on the left quite often, Layla Sidi, but Layla is a woodworker who builds guitars, and noticed that guitars are built en masse for a specific body type, predominantly male body type. So what she does is she builds guitars for people of different sizes, builds them using light wood so that it's easier to carry, as well as focuses on environmental practices in the wood that she sources from her local community. So there are so many examples of members who are doing amazing things like this. We could talk for hours about it. And I'm sure all of you have amazing stories about what you're doing. So hopefully one day we'll hear from everybody. And so another form of design justice in action is our working groups. And there are 2 active ones right now and more that are being facilitated and hopefully being built soon. But one that I really want to highlight, and Lindsay is here to speak to, is the Design Justice Principles at Work working group. So I will pass it to Lindsay for a second.
Thanks, Victoria. Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsay. I use pronouns she and they. I'm a UX designer and artist illustrator who is working out of like the San Diego area, which is Kumeyaay land. And I am working both with kind of a somewhat local node to me, the Los Angeles Design Justice node. And then I've also been working with the Principles at Work group. So I did want to share a little bit about what we're doing and what our objective is. We are really all about trying to create a space for workers in professionalized organizations, industries, places, or spaces to critically engage with some of this design justice work and the design justice mindset about how we can bring some of these things to the everyday work that we're doing in these professionalized spaces. And we're endeavoring to do this through building workshops, zines, and then other community building events. So a couple of kind of fun current initiatives that we're doing. We developed a scenario-based virtual workshop in 2020, which we've been bringing to various organizations. Our next workshop is in August, and definitely our members have had, of the working group, have had opportunities to do workshop facilitation or help build out those workshops. So some great opportunities there. And then I've primarily been involved in the zine subgroup of the Principles at Work group, and we have been trying to put together a single issue PDF zine over the summer that's sharing some of these lessons that we've learned from the workshops, bringing in members' art and illustration and other pieces related to our professionalized work. So lots of opportunities with the group, and super happy to be here today to kind of share what we've been up to. I will go ahead and pass it over to Victoria again now, but I am going to drop a couple of links for folks in the chat if they're interested in getting involved. Yeah, so I'll pass it back to you, Victoria.
Thanks so much, Lindsay. We're also learning that it's really great when folks get to hear from members who are actually doing things, which is why we're trying to invite more of our members to participate in these meetings and stick around for the question and answer period, because that's perfect. The other working group that is listed there is the communications working group, and they're really just getting started. They're going to be focusing on some more writing for the network, as well as some of the social media, making it more easy, more accessible, more features of our members and what's going on in the network. So that's a really exciting way to get involved if that sounds interesting. The other design justice in action that has become a really big component of the network are our local nodes. And local nodes are as I mentioned, like locally based. So the image that you can see there is actually from a facilitators connect meeting, where it's people from the various local nodes across the world that came together and they meet once a month and they talk about like what are each of the working or the nodes doing, how do those things connect, how can we support each other. But just to give an example of some of the different things people have done in local nodes, some have done a reading group around the design justice book that I mentioned at the beginning. Some have been reading other books that are very progressive and like-minded to design justice. The Vancouver node, for example, has been doing a decolonizing design workshop where people are able to share the work that they're working on, get feedback and reading around decolonizing design together. The node in Dallas has been working with or supporting an organization called the Period Project to allow more safe and sanitary products for when femme and female identified folks are going through their period and are experiencing like costly what am I trying to say? The tools that they need to support themselves during that time are very, very expensive. So they're working with them to support that. The Philly node, for example, has done a couple in-person meetings, and they've also been doing a lot of those reading groups. And there are so many really cool examples. So basically the opportunity is there to either join one that's already existing or start your own local node in the area that you're a part of. It could be an entire state or entire, for me, it's province in Canada. It could be a local city where you're based. It could be a bigger area based on what works. Some are doing it just at, an education institution. So it's kind of up to you what feels best and what feels like one that you could coordinate. But there's the opportunity to coordinate one, or there's also the opportunity to participate in one. And if you have questions about those after, they're definitely open and welcome. But there's some resources there to talk about more what nodes are, what they do, and how to get one started. And on the right-hand side of the screen is a local node zine that can lead you through a whole bunch of ideas on how to get started and what to do in one. And then there's some other ways that people have been volunteering and supporting within the network. Just to name a few of those, some people have done translations of the design justice principles. So we have the principles now in Turkish, in Mandarin, both simplified and complex, I think. We have them in Spanish and Italian and many other languages. I forget how many now. But if translating sounds like something that is interesting to you, then that's definitely an opportunity. Some people have been writing, whether they attend an event like the one we're in right now and writing a report back, or writing some of our social content, taking notes at events, and any kind of other ideas that you think might help either support the network or help spread design justice. We're very open to ideas and feedback and having people be involved. And then very quickly, just to share some of the impacts of the network that have been happening all over the world. There's been a lot of conversation around design education. And when I say design education, it's around the re-education or the changing of the current design education to incorporate design justice, to talk about those processes that I started the meeting off with. There have been tons of local workshops. There are local nodes popping up all over the world. There have been tons of different projects like what Lindsay shared around the working group and the principles at work and the zines and the presentations. There's been organizational sign-ons and lots of content creation around the principles. And I'm realizing it's spelt wrong on the slide, so sorry about that. But content creation, whether it be like designing images that incorporate the principles or creating more content that incorporates them. It's been amazing to see just how far and wide this has happened. But there's also tons of room for growth within the network. So the network is mostly volunteer run. Myself, I'm in a paid position as a coordinator, but I still am a member and volunteering a lot within the network. People are distributed geographically. So as an international network, time zone conflicts comes up a lot because we can't have a meeting that's going to work for everyone in the whole world. Which is why we try to rotate the times of our meetings a lot. The network was growing really, really big. So we've had evolving structures and evolving decision-making process, and we're still learning, we're still growing and improving each time, especially when we hold meetings like this or when we hear great feedback from different parts of the network. So there's lots of room there. And there's lots of room around organizing and activating the design justice principles. So that's a common question, like, how do I get started? Or what do I do? Or how do I use these principles in my daily work? And I think to answer it in a really quick moment, a lot of times what we say is like, try to maybe take one of the principles and incorporate that into the thing that you're doing or your workplace or whatever it is. And start with that and see how that can push the dial, and then incorporate some more or reach out to the network for support. And another thing is just understanding who is in the network and the best scale for the network. So I think we've done a lot of things in the last couple of years, and the scale, like, it continues to grow and grow and grow, but there aren't always enough people to support that growth. So partly we consider, how do we scale this network in the best way that doesn't burn everybody out and that doesn't carry too much weight on a lot of people. So part of that is understanding more who's in the network and who is interested in doing things. So there's lots of room for growth in a network. And the next part, when we talk about questions and things, that's the opportunity to share any ideas that you might have on how to make it better. So these last two slides are just there for reference. So if you haven't signed on to the principles, that's the link right there. And I can paste that into the chat. So if it sounds interesting or you haven't done them yet, haven't signed on yet, you can. And there's the link right there. So that's signing on to the 10 design justice principles. And after you sign on, it actually redirects you to the become a member page. But this is also the link that you can go to learn more about membership and become a member if you're interested. And then the final slide is the question and answer form of the meeting. So I'm going to paste this into the chat, and I'm going to stop the recording now. Stop once I find the button. Okay, here.